Welcome to episode 39, a special video episode of How to Read Chinese Poetry podcast. In this episode, we'll go beyond technical issues of tonal patterning and probe how the 律诗 form embodies traditional Chinese yin-yang mode of thinking. I shall compare Shakespeare's Sonnet 18 with Du Fu's 律诗 poem, Spring Scene. I will demonstrate how both their forms and contents exemplified Western and traditional Chinese mode of cosmological or philosophical thinking. Sonnet is the most complex and elegant of a regulated poetic form in English poetry, as regulated verse or 律诗 is in Chinese poetry. Both sonnet and 律诗 implement a set of mandatory rules pertaining to number of lines, sonnet 14, 律诗 8, meter, for sonnet iambic pentameter, for 律诗 tonal patterning. The rhyming scheme of sonnet is AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, GG. Here I refer to Shakespearean sonnet. The rhyming scheme for 律诗 is n rhyme in level tones on all even number lines. Structure: both sonnet and 律诗 have a tetrapartite structure. The establishment of any regulated poetry, whether English sonnet or Chinese 律诗, represent an endeavor to formalize and amplify our delight in the natural order of language. Both the sonnet and the 律诗 form may be seen to reflect the order of the universe at large. First, let us listen to Shakespeare's sonnet and then discuss the sonnet form.
Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderst in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe, or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee.
Now here, I use the first line example to demonstrate what it means by iambic pentameter. The pentameter means a meter that consists of 5 feet in each line. And then each foot is made up of an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. So it's da-dum, dum-dum, 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 dum-dum. The first 4 lines constitute the first quatrain, and the rhyming scheme is AB, AB. And then this is followed by the second quatrain, and the rhyming scheme is CD, CD. This is the third quatrain. The rhyming scheme is EF, EF. Then the last 2 lines are the couplet, and the rhyming scheme is GG. And because sonnet is such a dignified form, and some critics add the adjective heroic, they call this 3 quatrains heroic quatrain, and they call the concluding couplet heroic couplet. Now let's look at the structure of a sonnet. In this particular piece, the first couplet presents an argument comparing summer's day with thee, a symbol of ideal beauty. Thee is the old object form of you. Then 6 lines are devoted to depicting summer. Then in the third quatrain, then we have a turning, a dramatic turning to thee or you. The last line is a concluding statement. In a Shakespeare sonnet, the rhyming scheme and the tetrapart structure often serve to facilitate a linear process of dualistic thinking. In this sonnet, for instance, we clearly see how the 4-phase progression undergirds this dualistic process. In phase 1, both sides of the dualism are presented, summer versus thee or you, a personification of ideal beauty. This dichotomous opposition could be visually presented with this image. Phase 2, the underprivileged side of this dualism, summer, or rather nature, is described with its vulnerability and evanescence. Then at the third phase, the third quatrain engineers a dramatic turning to the privileged side, thee, or rather humanity, focusing on its imperviousness to the ravage of time. Then at the fourth and the final phase, the concluding statement celebrates the triumph of thee over summer, or rather eternal humanity over frail nature. Sonnet 18 clearly articulates the Elizabethan view of nature versus human, a worldview that traces back to the biblical notion of man having dominion over nature. And this view remains unchallenged until the Romantic era. More importantly, both the contents and the forms of Sonnet 18 displayed all 3 prominent features of dualistic thinking. First, a privileging of one side over the other, thee versus summer. Second, an inevitable conflict between the two sides. Here, the contrasts are competition between thee and summer. And third, a resolution of the conflict with the privileged sides triumphing over the other side, or even absorbing the other. And this is signified by the phrase, thy eternal summer. And here, summer is completely absorbed by humanity, by thee. On a philosophical plane, this dualistic thinking has been conceptualized as a linear or teleological dialect, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. This dualistic thinking permeates and dominates Western thought at all levels. Let's consider the list of these fundamental dualities. Light versus darkness, spirit versus flesh, good versus evil, God versus humanity. The list can go on and on, almost infinite. As shown here, all duality are reconcilably opposed to each other, and the privileged side is set to subjugate or even displace the other. In the Shakespearean sonnet form, pentameter is used without any change in 14 lines. But its rhyming scheme introduces a consistent change of end rhyme to match its 4 parts, that is, 3 quatrains and 1 couplet. The reverse is true of the 日式 form. Its end rhymes on even number lines are uniformly in level tones and emit no change. But its tonal meter implements a continuous mutual becoming between the 2 opposite tonal clusters. This mutual becoming occurs simultaneously on the couplet and the line levels, as shown in Du Fu's Spring Scenes. Let's first look at the alternation between 2-2-1 and 3-2 couplets on the left. We should note that this alternation between the 2 couplet types is staggered with the alternation of level tone dominant and oblique tone dominant lines, as shown on the right. It is important to note that these two alternating patterns progress in a cyclical rather than a linear fashion. On the couplet level, the last couplet leads back to the beginning couplet, and therefore we have a new alternation between 2-1 and 3-2 couplets. On the line level, the long ending line loops back to the long opening line to form a complete circle. Moving from tonal pattern to structuring, I should point out that a sophisticated cyclical alternation of tonal clusters is interfaced with an equally sophisticated cyclical alternation of semantic syntactic units, as shown in the word-for-word translation of Du Fu's Spring Scene. On the structural level, the 4 couplets in the Ri Si poem are seen by many as a 4-phase progression: beginning, continuation, turning, and converging, or in Chinese, 起承转合. This progression is called cyclical rather than linear because the last couplet is supposed to echo the beginning or converge with the beginning to form a complete circle. Now let's look at how the 4-phase progression works in Du Fu's Spring Scene. The first couplet is the beginning. Typically, the first couplet is a non-parallel couplet that introduces time and space. I mean the specific time and space. And here you have a broken country, abandoned city, versus the eternally renewed nature. The second couplet serves the function of continuation, and the images becomes specific, flower, a tear, but these are the images without any reference to specific time and space. Then third couplet is a turning. Here you can see the description switching from nature to the human world. Then we have the final concluding couplet. My hairs, as I scratch them, grow more sparse, simply becoming unable to hold pins. So the poet in the concluding couplet moves out from the eternal present of the middle couplet back to the temporal world, to himself. Then he gives us an image of his decaying physical condition. So this decaying physical condition echoes the horrible condition of a broken country. So this poem gives us a perfect example of the 4-stage cyclical progression, because the last line converged with the first line. If the rhyming scheme and structure of Sonnet 18 reveals a linear mode of dualistic thinking, the multiple layers of cyclical alternation of opposites in Du Fu's poem reveal a cyclical mode of yin-yang thinking, encapsulated by this well-known yin-yang symbol. In this symbol, black and white are meant to present the two basic opposing cosmic forces of yin and yang. Yin is associated with, among other qualities, female, dark, soft, and yielding, and yang with male, light, hard, and assertive. In this yin-yang symbol, we notice that a white dot in the black part and the black dot in the white part. This dot tells us two things. First, white and black parts are not absolute, insoluble opposites, as each contains an element of the opposite. Second, the self-inherent element of the opposite is the inner cause of things developing and eventually becoming their opposite. This process of becoming is one in which a small incipient force growing and gaining ascendance over the dominant force, and conversely, an ascending force declining to yield a new emerging force. The dynamic interplay of yin-yang thus follow a cyclical pattern of ascendance and decline. And finally, the circle of yin-yang symbol itself speaks to the all-inclusiveness, completeness, and eternity of yin-yang alternation. After my explanation of the yin-yang symbol, it should be apparent that the tonal patterning and the structuring of the Li Si form crystallize the cyclical process of yin-yang mutual becoming. Here, let's go beyond poetry and reflect on the differences between dualistic and yin-yang mode of thinking. On the left is a symbol we can use to characterize the dualistic mode of thinking. The straight vertical dividing line captures well the customary Western dualistic thinking, characterized by an absolute dichotomy of opposites, especially in moral, religious, and philosophical discourses. Just think about how we think of the relationship between God and humans, between spirit and flesh, between good and evil, between freedom and authoritarianism. These are all irreconcilable dualities. In the sense, the side of the lesser of no value cannot change to the other side of value. For instance, it would be sacrilegious to say human being can become God, or to claim that evil can become good. It is taken for granted that the privileged side is set to clash with and eventually triumph over the other side. But the yin-yang mode of thinking, grounded in the belief of mutual becoming of all opposites, enable Chinese to embrace or even enshrine this famous saying, a murderer can become a Buddha the moment he lays down the butcher's knife. To end this talk, let's come back to Shakespeare and Du Fu's poems and point out how the fundamental differences between the dualistic thinking and the yin-yang mode of thinking are reflected in the poet's view of nature and humanity. Just as Shakespeare thinks dualistically about nature and humanity and present a linear philosophical argument on man's superiority over nature, Du Fu blends his personal feelings with nature images and thereby project the Confucian worldview, marked by a touching bond and empathy between nature and humanity in spring scene. What underlines this poetic fusion of emotion with nature is a deep cultural belief in the mutual complementarity and the mutual dependence between all opposites, including man and nature. This is the end of episode 39 and the end of topic 12. Next week, we'll get started on topic 13, the sound of the Tang poetry, transcultural performance, to be hosted by Professor Jonathan Stalling and Dr. Andrew Merritt. Let us meet next Tuesday on YouTube and Bilibili.